So moving on then, so we have Jim Kirk from Deadline Products speaking to us today, one of our sponsors, which we always very much appreciate, and he will be talking about insecticides and the sort of changing face of insecticides. So Jim, if you are there, would you be able to show us your face and unmute yourself? That would be great.
Thanks. Well, hopefully I've pressed the right buttons. It's always a bit hit and miss, but I will share away.
Great.
So if everything's working properly, you should be able to see a slide. This is where I'm hoping somebody comes in and says, yes, we can.
Sorry, we can. Yeah, it's all there, Jim. Thank you.
Right, fabulous. Welcome to the session, everybody, and thank you for dialing into this. As always, it's a pleasure to sponsor these events, and when you do sponsor them, you're given the honour of a small slot to come and talk about some products and do some promotional stuff. Instead of just doing that, though, I thought that we'd have a more general discussion about insecticides. So this falls into two parts. It's a very short presentation. There's about 6 slides or so. And I want the bulk of this to be effectively handled in a Q&A session. So what I want to do is outline the position that insecticides face in general at the moment. Hopefully we'll get a bagload of questions that come in. I'm sure we will get some, because I know changing use of products is something that is an issue and a concern or a risk, however you want to phrase it, to a lot of people in pest control. So by all means, pour your questions in there. I'll then run through a short 2 or 3 slides about what specifically we're doing about it to try and support that, and hopefully we can then move on and have a good, interesting sort of Q&A session at the end. So with a bit of luck, that's how it'll work. So I'll just start flicking through. What do I mean by insecticides are changing? This is quite handy, actually, to follow the discussion about rodenticides. Because obviously we've seen with rodenticides a number of waves of attention, for want of a better way of putting it, from the authorities. And we've looked very closely at how rodenticides are affecting the environment. We've looked very closely at how rodenticides are affecting non-target species, about how people using them are applying the products, the thought processes are, what the techniques are. All this kind of stuff has very much been in focus for quite some time now. And there's nothing new on that scale. Now, largely, insecticides have avoided the same level of scrutiny that we've seen go through rodenticides. However, probably not for much longer. And we've already seen this starting in some areas. So, as some of you will know, insecticidal active ingredients and formulations are currently going through their next round of regulatory cycle. And so things like the environmental concerns, issues, non-target issues, pollution issues that are created by insecticides is now an active discussion at the sort of the regulatory level. Anybody wanting to support new products using certainly the more traditional, you want to class it as that, active ingredients, are having to follow new rules, new guidelines, submit new data, which is significantly more stringent, not to mention expensive to put together, than we have done previously. And the impact of that is that it's very likely we're going to see quite a big squeeze on insecticides as a sector as we move through. And I don't mean 10 years from now. I mean, really, we're starting to see it now, and we will see it in full force within the next couple of years. I don't want to talk about specific products, but there's been traditional, very popular products that have been through label restrictions and usage restrictions in the last couple of years, a number of them. It's not just been 1 or 2. And that pattern is something we're going to see more of. It'll affect more products, and it'll affect more products more stringently. So that's the discussion I want to sort of generate during the Q&A in the background to what I want to talk about today. So we've got this environment where we're really having to be more accountable now for our insecticide products and how we use them. So how can manufacturers and distributors go about supporting their customers? So effectively, we have a dual approach, and many people do. So partly we want to support and adapt our existing formulations to keep what we can on market. And then the vast majority of people are doing this. And that involves effectively putting together new enhanced data packs for submission and a whole new round of testing. People are spending a lot of time, effort, and money on field trialing, on lab testing formulations against a very wide range of species. So we're doing that, and that's going on. Partly, we're then also looking to develop new solutions and new formulations that don't have the same level of concern that the existing ones do. So partly, keep what we've got available, keep the toolkit available for pest controls as best as we can, and then try and plug the gaps with new solutions, new products that carry a reduced level of concern in the eyes of the authorities. So that's effectively the dual strategy we've got here. And there's a couple of major benefits that we're looking to try and get out of that strategy. So firstly, there's the very obvious one in terms of the impact on the environment and non-targets. So very similar to rodenticides, a lot of focus on, us chucking this sort of stuff into the environment. A lot of these molecules linger around, certainly in things like the watercourse, for a very long time. What's the risk there? And what impact are we starting to see on non-targets? And there's been lots of discussions that range from very specific, highly evidenced ones to more generic discussions about, is it something to do with, is a bee population, for example, something to do with how we're using insecticide? So there's active discussions, and we're looking to produce products that lower those levels of concern. And the other one is directly for our customers and our pest controllers. Because obviously we're aware that this is how pest controllers earn their living largely. We go out and we do use insecticides on a regular basis to treat problems that your customers have. We have ways of applying and dealing with those situations, and we want to try and maintain as little change to that as possible, really, because we don't want to be putting, obviously, our pest control customers and their downstream customers in situations where we don't really have the solutions to deal with their problem. So what have we done about it? So specifically at Deadline, we've developed 3 separate formulations now, following those guiding principles of minimum risk to non-target species and wildlife, whilst maintaining, as broad a spectrum and broader use of pest controls as we can. We've put a testing and field trialing package of information together, which has been submitted. We've had these registered now. They're all extremely effective in terms of knockdown. They all have very low residuality, which is a good discussion point I want to try and get into during the Q&A if possible, this sort of residual versus non-residual argument, which is going on with insecticides at the moment. And importantly, can be used in a fairly wide variety of situations. Internally and externally being probably the main one. But what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of pressure on insecticides to use them only in very specific situations. And we need options for when we have situations outside of that. So they're all based on Pyrethrum, which is a natural extract from the chrysanthemum plant. They're all considered by the authorities to be relatively, and that's an important term, relatively low risk. And they're all sort of at the back end of the queue, if you like, when it comes to people looking at these from a risk perspective. And because we've done it in 3 different formats, we're hoping that this will mitigate some of the risks faced by pest controllers in terms of dealing with restrictions. So to make sure you have products in the right formats to be used to deal with the situations that your customers find themselves in. So specifically, we've got a ready-to-use kerosene-based spray for spraying, so for surface spraying, cracks, crevice type treatments. We've got a specialist solution for fogging, which is slightly different. We've got that on a mineral oil base to produce very, very small droplets that is generally desirable in a fogging scenario. And we've got this active material that can be disseminated around in a dust format as well, using a carrier that isn't based on talc, which is another material that's up for discussion in terms of its risk at the moment. So we believe all three of these products will have a long life within the marketplace. They're all very broad spectrum. So there's lots of insects on the label. There's lots of usage areas on the label. And they're good products to use if the ones that you typically rely on are potentially restricted or made more difficult for one reason or another. So, but I didn't want this presentation to be too focused on those specific products, so I'll move on. But we've got these options: fog, spray, and dusts. I did want to talk a little bit about using pyrethrum in general, because it's slightly different to some of the sort of synthetic pyrethroids that people will have been using for some time. And it does impact how you go about your treatments and when to use them. So the same as a lot of products in a lot of areas, it's not so much is the product any good or not. That's not necessarily a great question. It's whether the product's good in a given situation. When's the right time to deploy it? Now, when you're using any of these natural pyrethrum-based formulations, there's a couple of things to consider. First up, the knockdown on natural pyrethrum is extremely quick. Okay, really good. You get a very immediate visible action, much more so than most of the synthetic pyrethroids. So you tend to get better knockdown, which is good and bad, which I'll come to in a moment. So your knockdown's great. And there is a fairly significantly reduced risk of sort of long-term contamination and non-target species due to the way that this material breaks down very, very quickly, especially under natural light. But even without huge amounts of natural light, you're going to find that this breaks down quite quickly. Now, that leads to the fact that you don't really have much residual action. And residuality is a key discussion that people have, and we have with our customers and pest controllers all the time. Traditionally, residuality has been seen as a huge benefit, and it is in many ways, because it can carry on doing the job for us, if we like, when we've disappeared off-site days previously, which is great, and it reduces the risk of having to go back and do retreatments and things like that nobody really wants to do. However, residuality is one of the key factors that the authorities are looking at now in terms of its risk. And a lot of residual products are not just residually killing insects for a large period of time, they actually sit in the watercourse for, well, potentially years, a long, long time. And that's creating a lot of nervousness towards this in terms of the authorities. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, residuality. But what I'd say is if you're doing a treatment where you are absolutely reliant on residuality to create a successful outcome, then natural pyrethrum-based products are, generally speaking, not the ones to go for. These are the ones to go for when you want to deal and knock down and deal with them there and then on the day. If you're looking for something that's going to rely on residuality to really do your work for you, that's probably going to be better off looking elsewhere. The best example that I can come up with, because it's one that I've discussed about with a number of customers on a number of occasions, is wasp nest treatments. So if you're doing a wasp nest treatment, you've got decent access, internal or external, and you've got decent access to the nest, and you can apply, let's say, a pyrethrum dust directly into the nest. You've got good access to the entry points, things like that. Then pyrethrum a great product to use. It's a fantastic product to use. You'll kill the nest extremely quickly. No problems. Everyone's happy. You do the job quickly. Customer gets the wasp nest dealt with, and off we go. And we have very little potential risk to non-targets, very little potential risk to the environment. Fantastic. If you're doing a wasp nest where you're requiring the wasps to effectively carry the dust into the nest to do the work for you, so you've got a wasp nest, for example, that's buried below parts of the patio or the side of a door or an awning, you can't really access the nest directly, so you're spraying, historically you'd spray powder kind of as close to the nest as you can or onto the nest in some way. and you're relying on the wasps then carrying that into the nest for you, then you're unlikely to get a good result using Pyrethrum. And that's to do with the speed of a knockdown. So with some other products, the speed of a knockdown is quite slow. The kill's reliable, but the speed of a knockdown is quite slow. So the wasp will carry that into the nest, no problem. With Pyrethrum, it tends to kill them before they get the chance to do that. So if you're treating for something that's buried away and it's hard to get to, it's hard to apply it directly to the nest, you're likely to run the risk of treating it, killing a bunch of wasps, but not killing the nest. And so selecting the right time to use the Pyrethrum product and the right time to reduce that risk to the environment is absolutely key. Because obviously the last thing we want is people to buy products to do a job that it doesn't do correctly. So it's important when doing things like that, doing treatments that require on that residual response, you probably want to look at one with a slower knockdown, look at other solutions. If you've got good access to something and you want direct knockdown and you want something that'll do it very, very quickly in and out in the day, Pyrethrum is a great choice. So choosing the products here is an important part of the process. And that's it. And I'm hoping, because I'm going to click off here now, back to the screen, and I'm hoping that we're going to have a bunch of questions. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Is that right, Natalie?
Indeed, yeah, please. That'd be great. We've just got 2 questions there. I think that's it. I think you've just done the presentation so well. You've answered all the questions anyone might have.
Questions away. I've just drink the coffee. The break was only quite short.
Indeed. So, okay, we've got two. The first question then from Dan Lake. It's how quickly does a pesticide, and obviously in this instance Pyrethrum, need to break down into harmless into a harmless particle, shall we say, to be considered non-residual?
I don't think there's a fixed time limit on it, to be honest. There's not really a fixed time limit on it. When authorities are considering risk, the length of time a molecule stays intact, if you want to put it like that, is a live consideration. It's something they actively consider. Mm-hmm. And with the insecticides we've got at the moment, we don't so much have a sliding scale, if you like, where you've got different actives at different levels. You tend to get actives that hang around for an extremely long period of time. I mean, over time, they're going to get washed off and cleaned off and what have you. Mm. And they may not protect that surface for, years. Mm. But the molecule might be live for years. And the big risk with insecticides, because the vast majority of them, including Pyrethrum, the vast majority of them are highly toxic to aquatic life. Mm. And a lot of these molecules hang around a long time in the watercourse. Mm-hmm. And so that's the big risk. The non-residual ones will break down very, very quickly. It does depend largely on the formulation, so it's hard to generalize too much and be accurate. Mm-hmm. But natural Pyrethrum is one that breaks down really quite quickly. Especially under UV light, natural light. Mm-hmm. It will break down within, a few hours in most cases.
Yeah.
So you're not going to
environment as well, maybe temperatures, humidity, things like that as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Exactly. It's very it's very dependent on when and where you use it, which is a really cop-out answer to the question. And I'm not meaning to do that. But it is largely dependent. But Pyrethrum usually a few hours. Most of the more residual insecticides may get cleared from the surface, but they'll still be active in the watercourse for a significant period of time.
Mm-hmm. And this is why any users of these products, they need to be really educated on them, read the labels, read the instructions, have some training on it if they can, so they understand how it works and the risks associated with it and the residuality, so that they can address that depending on what site they've got. It's difficult. We can't answer every question too specifically, can we?
No, we can't. But there's, as I say, historically, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, rodenticides have been through this sieve of examination, and there's been a huge amount of testing and control work done on them, standardization done on them. Mm-hmm. Insecticides haven't really been through that And historically, to get an insecticide onto the market, you need to provide a relatively small amount of data. You can make all kinds of assumptions about efficacy based on other stuff that's out there and on the trials that you do have. And it's been an okay thing to do. And the UK is not, the least stringent here. I mean, there's authorities in Europe who historically have had zero regulation of these products. Germany has had no registration, for example, of insecticides historically. So moving to a new regime where if you want to put the insect on a label, you need to do field trials against that specific insect. You need to do lab trials against that specific insect. You need to provide a lot more data. So there's a lot more scrutiny involved. And it's sometimes quite difficult to gather that data. So if you want fleas on the label, for example, you need to go find a family with fleas somewhere and say, do you mind if you get bitten by fleas for a week or two while I do a census? And then I'll come in and use my product, and then we'll do a census at the end of it. And customers tend to say, I'd rather you just kill the fleas. So it's actually quite difficult practically to deal with a lot of this data requirement, but there's much more focus on it.
Good stuff. There's a question about the PY dust and what the shelf life is of it, that you know.
Shelf life is 2 years. The way that most products are done on shelf life is you make some, you put it on the shelf. There's nothing. You do some of what's called accelerated trials where you put it in an oven at certain temperatures to simulate, and you can get some advanced data like that. But now authorities tend, before they give you a full shelf life, they tend to want ambient temperature, and there's no way of rushing that. You put it on the shelf for 2 years, and then you test the amount of active ingredient in it 2 years later. And after 2 years, it's fine. It might be fine 10 years down the track, but we don't know because 2 years is about what most people tend to do.
Great. There's a good question here about the active ingredient, which I think a lot of us experience. But George has said he's used Pyrethrum and he's experienced wasps becoming very aggressive before dying. Has he been doing something wrong?
No, he hasn't been doing anything wrong. It's something that can happen. And it's not restricted to Pyrethrum. Wasps, the little antsy little so-and-sos, historically a carbamate-based product has been the least likely to result in wasps becoming aggressive. But if you use pretty much anything else, the level of aggression you generally get from Pyrethrum's probably a little bit less than it is using synthetic pyrethroids like permethrin, which have very similar effects. And there's all kinds of stories about pest controllers being chased to their vans. They're not uncommon because wasps do become quite aggressive, and they do with natural Pyrethrum as well. I mean the protection with natural Pyrethrum is make sure you've got the right gear on, and it kills them very quickly, which it does. The knockdown is extremely fast, but there's been, again, I won't mention names, it's not appropriate to do so, but there's been carbamate-based products which have been reliable for wasp nests for a long, long time. People have liked, and one of the reasons is that the wasps tended not to chase them to the van. But that's
just a physical action of disturbing them can make them pretty angry as well, can't it? So
yeah, I mean, I won't go into the massive detail. There's a lot of it's about the time of day, the state of the colony, etc. So it's not it's not a linear equation. But yes, wasps becoming aggressive when you're using a permethrin or a Pyrethrum or something along those ilk, which are being used more now because there's lower levels of restriction, is a risk that people need to mitigate against. So put a B-veil and a pair of gloves on and some running shoes.
There's a question about resistance and what information that there is regarding resistance to insecticides. Trickier one, but I don't know. What do you think about that resistance?
Well, there's resistance to insecticides across some species in some areas. There's some species where resistance is really common. So if you take bed bugs, for example, resistance is a live issue and something people bump into regularly. If you're looking at dealing with wasp nests, then resistance isn't really a concern. So it depends on what you're looking at. But yeah, certainly within some insect populations, resistance is a real issue. And again, very similar to rodenticides, we know it's there, but we don't have enormous amounts of information out there. There's a number of people out there doing studies on bed bugs and cockroaches and things like that. But it's not a very clear picture. We just know it's out there and it's a bit of an issue. And one of the best practices with using insecticides, especially if you're using it in the same area for similar insect types, is to not use the same product all the time. We know that creates resistance. We know that if you turn up and treat, the same populations or similar populations with the same product all the time, you're going to get yourself into hot water, and it promotes resistance. So rotate your product usage around is your best defense against that.
Yeah, like you said, it's very species specific. So I know we done a webinar on bed bugs, and resistant issues are in there. So again, a useful thing to have. But
yeah, it's a real problem with bed bugs, which is why people are looking at alternative treatments, different insecticides, and also non-insecticide based solutions where that's viable to do so are useful, because it helps you get around that. It's not always the cheapest or easiest option, but it's physical control is something I think for insects we need to be a lot more turned on to than we are at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's becoming a lot more common. We're getting a lot more questions as well, so that's good. We've got another 7 or 8 minutes, so it's good. Right, okay. So there's a long-ish one here. Shall we go for it? So I have used PY Fog. It has a really good knockdown. Ideally, it is used once critical limits that have been set have been breached. It is also good to note that inspection and monitoring is the first process. Insecticide treatment should be targeted to reduced usage, all part of the integrated pest management program. Having a client follow recommendations, important proofing, housekeeping, stock rotation. So more of a comment really, and supporting, how to do a good approach to pest management.
It is. I was going to copy and paste it and put that into the next time I do this talk. So but no, it's as a point, it's bang on. As pest controllers, we want access to products that do the job, and that's absolutely appropriate, and we need that. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. If you don't have a product to do the job, you're having problems. So we do need that, and part of doing that is to make sure we're using products properly.
Yeah.
If you like, and one of the key differences, and why we support the BPCA a lot, as you guys know, is the BPCA is one of those organisations where it's interested in pest controllers doing good pest control, doing the job right. And I think generally speaking, the membership is made up of people who are interested in education and getting better at pest control, and not just going out and lobbing poisons about the place. I know that sounds flippant, but that's something that we do see in areas. And as manufacturers who sit in front of committees of government authorities on a regular basis justifying our product's existence, when they come up with examples of, well, somebody's put your rodenticide paste in a BAP and stuck it on a bird spike, you do tend to wince a little bit. So yeah, we absolutely encourage everybody to make sensible product decisions, use them in the correct, appropriate ways.
IPM forward. Great. There's a question about the carcinogenic effect of the pyrethrum, and is there any? I mean, I know a lot of this would be on the manufacturer's safety data sheet, but is there any comment you have for that?
Well, it's not registered as a carcinogen in most areas. I mean, carcinogenic lists can be a little bit controversial, and if I'm being honest, I'm not an expert on them, so I don't want to get into a detailed discussion about it, simply because I don't want to give any information that's wrong. But depending on what list you want to look at, hot drinks, for example, are carcinogenic. So this isn't registered in the UK. It's not listed as a carcinogen. So it's all's good on that front. But as I say, I've got no data on it, and I don't think anybody else really has, to be honest. But use the right sort of safety equipment when you use it. So a lot of products, for example, when you authorise them on the safety data sheet, it will stipulate PPE to be used by the applicators. This doesn't. It doesn't have any requirements from the authorities specifically. It just says use appropriate PPE. So, and again, I'd recommend anyone does exactly that and buy appropriate PPE. So if you're using a dust, certainly in an enclosed space for sure, put a particulate filter on your face mask. Usual normal stuff. If you're spraying or fogging, where you've got a bit more, smaller particles there, you use a P-rated filter. It's an A2, P3, whatever it is. You just make that sensible decision. It's probably what most of the people here are doing already. Wear the correct stuff, just in case, not wear the correct stuff because there's a clear and immediate danger. It's just best practice.
Absolutely. There's 4 or 5 more questions. Obviously, we won't get to them all, but I'm going to just pick out some really important ones that I think the whole of the delegates here will be interested in.
I'll have a quick look at them, see which ones I can actually answer. I was
going to say there's one from Patricia here about do we believe that a stewardship regime will be initiated for insecticides?
Maybe. I'm tempted to say yes here because there's a certain amount of natural momentum towards that. So the position we're in at the moment is people looking at them going, there's a lot of risk here. We don't really have a lot of data. We don't really have a lot of control, but we know these molecules act in this persistent fashion and we are concerned about it. And it's very similar to the sort of noises that were being made before rodenticides entered the stewardship scheme. So it feels quite similar. I think the challenge we've got with insecticides is, as opposed to rodenticides, they're much broader. They're aimed at a lot of species. There's a huge variation in products. So if you look at rodenticides, there's a small number of active ingredients, 4 or 5, 6, 7, you're in that kind of region. They're very likely to be very similar in concentration and makeup. So in theory, that should have been easy. And it wasn't. It was really, really hard. And when you look at insecticides, there's much more active ingredient action. The concentrations are way different. The makeup of the formulations is way different. The delivery mechanisms are way different. The species you aim at are way different. So I can imagine it being extremely difficult. So I think the only way we avoid going into a stewardship as informally is the fact that actually it's too hard. But there'll be certainly levels of control that, whether we call it stewardship or not, it will effectively be stewardship by default, I think, and managed through the authorization process for products.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's the title of it, the changing face of insecticide. I mean, that just says it all, really, doesn't it? And what can happen in these coming years is to be kept an eye on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great, fabulous, perfect timing. I think we're going to have to leave it there. There's a couple more questions unanswered, but again, as always, we can get those questions out if people want to get in touch with us. But Jim, thank you so much. That was very informative and very thorough, and I appreciate you coming along with us. No problem. If anybody's got any questions that weren't handled, feel free to email or drop your details in the chat, and I'll get back to you separately.